The grizzly bear is a formidable predator that should be avoided at all costs. Although attacks on humans are relatively rare, they have been responsible for hundreds of deaths in recent years. These animals typically attack to protect their food, cubs, or territory. While they usually prefer to avoid people, some intentionally seek them out. Such was the case with Timothy Treadwel, also known as the Bear Man. Even at a young age, Timothy had a love for animals and even had a few pets. Born in Long Island as Timothy Dexter, he attended Bradley University before dropping out, moving to Southern California, and legally changing his last name to Treadwel in 1987. He struggled with drug and alcohol addiction, nearly overdosing on heroin in the late 1980s. Treadwel battled substance abuse before taking his first trip to Alaska in 1989, after being persuaded by a close friend. It was there that his perspective on life changed, and he discovered his true calling. In his 1997 memoir, Among Grizzlies, he wrote that his first close encounter with a bear felt like looking into a mirror. The experience inspired him to get sober and ignited a deep passion for grizzly bears. Each year, Treadwel left his home in California to spend the summer in the Alaskan wilderness, where he observed and documented bears. For 13 summers, he studied these animals, spending the first part of each season camping in Big Green, an open area in Hello Bay along the coast of Katmai National Park. During these periods, some bears grew accustomed to his presence, allowing him to get extremely close to them, even petting the massive creatures. In his own words, he claimed to have a good relationship with the bears, built on trust and respect. After the release of his book, he began gaining media recognition for his work. His personality and close relationship with grizzlies also contributed to his growing fame. He traveled across the United States, speaking at schools and appearing on numerous TV programs to share his unique experience with the animals. In 1999, Treadwel produced and starred in the Grizzly Diaries for the Discovery Channel, and in 2001, he was interviewed by David Letterman. He even co-founded a charity called Grizzly People with his colleague and friend Jewel Palavac, aiming to protect grizzly bears from hunters. However, Timothy became a controversial figure. His interactions with Alaskan bears were seen by some, especially the National Park Service, as a serious interference with wildlife. Officials argued that rather than protecting the bears, he was actually invading their territory, disrupting their natural behavior, and putting himself in grave danger. Treadwel frequently violated key safety rules, such as refusing to carry bear spray and staying in the wilderness longer than permitted. Most notably, he ignored the fundamental guideline of maintaining a safe distance, often touching and getting dangerously close to the animals. But to Treadwel, his belief was unwavering. He was convinced that these bears would never harm him. Tom Smith, an ecologist at the Alaska Science Center, stated that Timothy was breaking all the rules of Katmai Park, harassing wildlife, and interfering with natural processes. In reality, despite everything he did, his knowledge, confidence, TV appearances, and school lectures, Timothy never actually provided any real protection for these animals. He typically spent the first part of each season in Big Green, at Hello Bay on the coast of Katmai, and moved to Kaflia Bay for the latter part of the summer, still within the park. Over the years, he recorded nearly 100 hours of video footage. On October 29, 2003, Timothy and his girlfriend, Amy Huguenard, returned to the Kaflia Bay area in Katmai. They had been warned about the dangers of camping there at that time of year, as food was scarce, and the bears were preparing for winter, eating as much as possible to store fat for hibernation. The purpose of the trip was for Timothy to check on his favorite bears and make sure they were well and ready for the winter. Amy, however, was hesitant. She was afraid of the animals. Despite her fears, she stayed, believing in the importance these creatures had in Timothy's life. During the trip, the couple tracked several bears, but Timothy quickly realized that most of them were unfamiliar. The ones he had known had already gone into hibernation, leaving the area occupied by new and unknown bears. Although he felt uneasy about being surrounded by unfamiliar creatures, he still chose to stay and set up camp. On October 5th, just one day before they were set to leave, Timothy prepared his camera. It was getting dark, and he wanted to capture some nighttime footage of the bears. As he set everything up, he turned the camera on, but forgot to remove the lens cap. As a result, only audio was recorded, capturing the faint sound of rain and the wind. Suddenly, Amy, who was inside the tent, heard terrified screams. It was Timothy. Rushing outside, she saw her boyfriend being attacked by a massive grizzly bear. Disoriented, Amy blurted out the first thing that came to mind. She told Timothy to play dead. He did exactly as she said, and for a brief moment, it worked. The bear backed off and disappeared from sight for a few minutes, just long enough for Timothy to start moving. But the bear hadn't actually left. As soon as it saw him stir, it returned and attacked again. Desperate, Timothy screamed for Amy to hit the bear with something. She grabbed a frying pan and struck the animal on the head, but it was useless. The beast continued its relentless assault. Realizing he had no chance of survival, Timothy shouted for Amy to run. He knew bears too well to believe he could escape. He remained conscious for most of the attack, witnessing everything as it unfolded. Along with the bear's growls and grunts, the desperate cries of Timothy were captured on the very camera he had set up earlier. That same camera recorded the horrifying sounds of the attack. As for Amy, unfortunately, she didn't run. Despite Timothy's desperate pleas for her to flee, she was frozen in shock. She had always feared these animals, and now she was trapped in a waking nightmare. Amy also didn't know the area. It was Timothy who was familiar with the terrain. She had no idea how to escape. Her screams of pure terror attracted the same bear that had attacked Treadwel. Amy, too, was killed and devoured that day. There were no other people in the area to witness their deaths. However, Larry Van Dale, a wildlife biologist who accompanied park rangers and state troopers to investigate the scene, believes the attack occurred at dusk or early evening, in the rain. According to the official National Park Service investigation report, Treadwel likely stepped out of the tent to check on a bear nearby. The bear, startled by the sudden appearance of a human, may have struck or bitten him in response. Timothy called for Amy's help, and she told him to play dead. At first, the bear retreated for a few minutes, only to return when Treadwel started moving again. Van Dale theorized that Amy's screams might have sounded like the cries of a wounded animal, which could have triggered the bear to return and kill her as well. The remains of Huguenot and Timothy were discovered on October 6th, when pilot Willie Fulton returned to the couple's campsite to pick them up. Upon arrival, Fulton found the tent flattened and a bear guarding a cache of human remains near the camp. He attempted to scare the bear away, but was unsuccessful. Realizing the severity of the situation, he contacted the National Park Service near King Salmon and the Alaska State Troopers in Kodiak. When the troopers and park officials arrived, they encountered two bears, a larger male and a smaller one. Both were shot due to their aggressive behavior. Later, an examination revealed that the larger bear had human remains in its digestive tract. The smaller bear, however, was scavenged by other bears before a necropsy could be performed. Bear attacks on humans are rare, and although Katmai National Park has the highest density of grizzly bears in the world, the deaths of Treadwel and Huguenot were the first documented human fatalities in the park's history. According to the official report, Timothy and Amy were killed in a bear attack that could have been prevented by following basic safety principles. The report also noted that their campsite and the surrounding area had poor visibility due to tall grass and dense shrubbery. The low visibility in the area meant that bears were more likely to be caught off guard and react defensively. Since Treadwel wanted to observe the animals closely, he set up camp in a way that maximized these encounters. They were also attacked at a time of year when bears desperately need to gain enough fat for hibernation. In 2005, filmmaker Werner Herzog released a documentary about Timothy titled Grizzly Man. The film, which incorporated Treadwel's own footage, was met with critical acclaim and won several awards. Timothy captured intimate, everyday moments of wild bears on film. Despite his horrific fate, his footage showcased the beauty of the brown bear. However, biologist Wesley Larson stated that Timothy's mission was ultimately a failure. Although he aimed to protect the bears, his actions led to the deaths of at least two of them. Additionally, his organization, Grizzly People, claimed to fight against poaching, but presented no concrete evidence that Timothy's expeditions ever prevented any hunting. The 6-minute audio recording of the attack was later discovered in the couple's video camera, but was never released to the public. According to Trooper Chris Hill, who was present when the tape was found and listened to the entire recording, It begins while Timothy is being attacked and ends as he is apparently dying. He'll also reveal that the recording was abruptly cut off when the tape reached its end. In the years following the incident, a highly convincing fake of the first 2 minutes surfaced online, with some believing it to be genuine. However, the original recording has never been released. During the production of Grizzly Man, Werner Herzog was granted access to the audio by Jewel Palahniuk, Timothy's friend and the recipient of the tape. After listening to the full recording, Herzog suggested that Palahniuk destroy it. Timothy Treadwel was a bear enthusiast, environmentalist, documentarian, and founder of the wildlife protection organization Grizzly People. He camped near the coast of Katmai, primarily in areas around Hallow Bay and Kaflia Bay. For 13 years, he lived among grizzly bears until he was fatally attacked by one. His name was synonymous with adventure and wildlife, and although many knew him as the crocodile hunter, he never harmed these animals. He was beloved and admired by his family, and had fans all over the world. Steve Irwin was not just a TV personality. He was a wildlife expert, an environmentalist, and the owner of a zoo. More than that, he was a passionate advocate for wildlife. Steve spent his entire life surrounded by animals. His father was a wildlife expert with a particular interest in reptiles and amphibians. It was he who started a small zoo in Queensland, in northeastern Australia, when Steve was still a child. This allowed the boy to grow up surrounded by various animals, especially crocodiles. By the time he was 6, Steve had a python to care for. By the age of 9, he was handling large reptiles. As an adult, he became fully immersed in the world of animals. In 1998, he took over the management of the zoo and eventually renamed it the Australia Zoo. September 4th, 2006, was supposed to be just another ordinary day in Irwin's life. At 44 years old, and with over 10 years of experience hosting TV shows, it was his hit series The Crocodile Hunter that had earned him his famous nickname. Steve loved his work as much as he loved the animals. He was also married, and his wife, Terry, had always supported him. Their 2 children, Bindi, aged 8, and Robert, aged 2, already admired him and were following in his footsteps. On that September 4th, Steve and his team traveled to the Great Barrier Reef, near Port Douglas, a small coastal town. They were about to film a documentary called The Deadliest in the Ocean. While Steve felt secure and motivated, not everyone on the team shared the same feeling. His friend and producer, John Stainton, sensed that something was wrong. In fact, 3 weeks before filming began, John had even called the Discovery Channel, asking them to cancel the project, but the network had already invested too much in it. John had to accept that the documentary would go ahead, but still, he prepared a will, just in case something happened to him. He couldn't shake the feeling of fear and dread. Steve and the whole team woke up early that day. They were at the Great Barrier Reef, with much work to be done. On the deck of Steve's boat, Croc 1, the team chatted and prepared. Irwin was always energetic, fun, and charismatic. But in that moment, he was particularly happy. Everything happening in his life seemed like a dream. He had an amazing family and a job he loved. He felt incredibly fulfilled. The crew noticed that the waters had become too murky. The area was home to various species like turtles, dolphins, and whales, but what they were really after was a shark. Steve wasn't the type of person to stand still and wait. He was the kind of guy who made things happen. He called over his cameraman, Justin Lyons, and the 2 of them suited up in diving gear and jumped into the water. They hoped to capture some footage, but when they realized the water was too murky, they decided to stop. Out of the water, Steve and the team decided to cancel the filming for the day. There wasn't much they could do. However, before leaving, Steve had an idea. He saw the delay as an opportunity to film some footage for his daughter's upcoming show. It was going to be called Bindi, the Jungle Girl. The Discovery Kids channel hoped that Bindi would enjoy the same success as her father, educating children around the world. So, Steve told his cameraman, Justin, to grab the camera again and get ready for another dive. They took an inflatable boat from Croc 1 and ventured out into the water. The waters weren't very deep, and both Justin and Steve had plenty of diving experience, so it didn't seem like anything could go wrong. Soon, they spotted a stingray, and it was beautiful. Stingrays aren't exactly what one would call dangerous creatures. They do have barbs, of course, but they aren't aggressive. When they feel threatened, they typically swim away or bury themselves in the sand. They rarely attack humans, and when they do, it's only because they feel provoked, such as when someone accidentally steps on them. Underwater, Steve and his cameraman got a better look at the stingray. It had a wingspan of about 2 meters, truly a magnificent creature. Steve, of course, wasn't afraid. After all, he dealt with crocodiles and many other dangerous animals every day. But this time, something inexplicable happened, something that would change everything forever. As Steve approached the stingray, it became agitated. In an instant, it raised its sharp tail and drove it directly into the man's chest. Justin didn't lower the camera right away, and while the stingray stabbed Irwin multiple times, the camera kept rolling. When the creature finally swam away, Steve was standing in a huge pool of blood. The stingray had pierced Steve's chest with frightening ease. He still managed to reach the surface and scream for help. Steve believed his lung had been punctured, but the truth was it wasn't his lung, it was his heart. Justin could see a 5-centimeter wide wound in Steve's chest, with blood pouring out. The cameraman quickly grabbed Steve and placed him in the inflatable boat before rushing back to Croc 1. Justin was desperate to help his friend, but Steve simply looked at him and spoke his final words. He said, "I'm dying," and then lost consciousness. When the paramedics arrived, it only took them about 10 seconds to determine that Steve was dead. Even if he had been taken to the hospital, he wouldn't have survived as the damage to his heart was too severe. The footage of the incident and his death was never released, and it likely never will be. In a matter of seconds, the beloved adventurer and crocodile hunter left the world, doing what he loved most. His wife and children were traveling through Tasmania when they learned the news. Terry had to cope with the immense sadness that came with hearing what had happened. When they arrived in Queensland, back at the Australia Zoo, they were shocked to see the media waiting for them. There were also many people crying and bringing flowers. Terry and their children took over the zoo, which was one of Steve's greatest passions. Both Bindi and Robert are animal handlers, as well as dedicated conservationists. For many, Steve wasn't just a charismatic TV personality. He was also a significant figure in wildlife education. Steve didn't just inspire a generation with his unique way of connecting with animals, but his legacy lives on through his family. Even after his passing, his spirit of adventure continues to resonate with everyone touched by his story. Hendri had always known that death could come at any moment, and he would tell his friends that. But his desire for adventure spoke louder and led him to take many risks. In his book, he described a deep sense of depression that would wash over him as each of his expeditions came to an end. He was only truly happy when he was alone with nature, pushing himself to the limit. Coetzee grew up in South Africa, where he found school boring and tedious during his youth. After finishing his studies and graduating from high school, he enlisted in the army. At 21, he returned to Africa, simply in search of adventure. In 1997, the Zambezi River, on the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, was becoming a popular destination for tourists. It offered many extreme activities to entertain the public, but the most eye-catching of them all was rafting. When Hendri heard about it, he became intrigued and sought more information on the programs. Maybe this was the kind of thing he had been searching for. Hendri ended up contacting Peter Meredith's Whitewater Rafting Company, one of the businesses offering these extreme sports. He went for an interview, and despite never having rafted or kayaked before in his life, he surprisingly landed the job. Right from the start, Hendri learned everything he needed to know and quickly began guiding tourists. He took several people rafting, becoming quite popular. Coetzee even guided people through Grade 5 rapids, which are known for being turbulent and dangerous, requiring advanced skills. Peter Meredith, the owner of the company, would describe the young man as having more courage than brains. Hendri would easily and without hesitation enter deadly Grade 6 rapids. Over time, Peter and Coetzee became good friends. In 2004, they embarked on an adventure together, traveling from Lake Victoria on the Nile River to the Mediterranean Sea. Years later, Hendri faced a 5-month journey down the Congo River on his own. During this expedition, He was hunted by members of a tribe and also had to avoid hippos and crocodiles. For Hendri, these dangers were nothing compared to sleeping along a riverbank, with only his camp and a campfire for protection. After so many travels and adventures across Africa, Coetzee realized that he wasn't getting any younger and couldn't live this kind of lifestyle forever. It was time for him to settle down and perhaps start a family. When Hendri met a girl, his desire to settle down grew. He also realized that he had more possibilities than just adrenaline-fueled expeditions. However, in 2010, Hendri received an email. It was from two professional American kayakers, Chris Corbulic and Ben Stooksbury. The email essentially said that they wanted to navigate the Congo and needed an experienced guide. Hendri wanted to stop traveling so much, but he still helped the men plan a route. He wrote a detailed itinerary for them, adding insights that only an explorer of his caliber could know. However, as he mapped out the journey, he felt that same sensation he used to feel when preparing for a solo trip. It was a restlessness mixed with excitement, hard to contain. So, after months of helping plan the entire route, Hendri decided to join them. When the journey began, the trio navigated the Congo's tributaries, starting along the Hasizi River. They still hoped to return home by the end of December for Christmas. Hendri's girlfriend was also eager to see him again. He had told her that this would be his last expedition, and then they would finally get to spend more time together. As they navigated the river, they occasionally stopped to rest or camp. They also took these moments to talk with local villagers living along the riverbanks they passed. If anything were to happen to any of the three, they had already made arrangements. Hendri had contacted the International Rescue Committee and made an agreement with them. In exchange for help if something happened, they and the other kayakers would speak with the communities they passed through, providing feedback to the committee. Their primary goal was to assist these communities, so it was a good deal. Hendri not only spoke with these communities, but also recorded videos explaining what they needed. Among the main issues were the lack of clean drinking water and schools. However, there was another challenge. They needed help dealing with a complication involving crocodiles. In recent years, several people have been taken by these animals. In fact, the crocodiles in the area were abundant. But this was no coincidence. Battles have been fought in that region, resulting in thousands of deaths. As most of these bodies were thrown into the rivers, they attracted many crocodiles that had become accustomed to both the location and human flesh. These creatures lived hidden and were always ready to attack anyone. In December 2010, the trio continued their planned route, paddling through a river with strong currents. Although the American kayakers were professionals, Hendri had to teach them how to paddle properly in the choppy waters. One of the things he also taught the kayakers was how to make noise and stay away from areas where animals might be hiding. On December 7th, the three were passing through a calm stretch of river. They also took the time to appreciate the surrounding nature and wildlife. Along the banks, a few crocodiles could be seen resting, but they were at a safe distance. This was a great experience for the Americans, who had never been here before. However, even with all the fascination, they were aware that they needed to stay vigilant. Until that point, the journey had been divided between stretches of strong currents and calmer waters. Now, the three were paddling one behind the other. Ben was slightly ahead of Hendri, and Chris was at the rear. While in the lead, Ben scanned the surroundings, looking for any signs of danger. The waters remained calm, and there were no visible signs of predators. However, unbeknownst to them, far below, an experienced predator was following their every move. Suddenly, Ben glanced back, only to see a massive crocodile emerging right next to Hendri. Ben, who only wanted to check on his companions, ended up witnessing an attack. Coetzee was startled by the sudden movement of the creature, but did not scream in fear. Instead, he simply said, "My God." His voice lacked any tone of fear. It was more one of surprise. That animal caught him completely off guard. In an instant, the massive beast bit down on his shoulder and quickly dragged him to the bottom of the river. The immense pressure of the bite likely crushed his shoulder and part of his chest. Ben and Chris watched in horror as the kayak sank, taking their friend with it. Hendri was pulled to the depths by the creature, which devoured him entirely. Although the attack was horrific, there is a strong possibility that Hendri suffered a quick death due to the crushing pressure of the bite and the force with which he was dragged under. According to Ben and Chris, The size of the creature's head indicated it was likely around 4.5 meters in length. As soon as Hendri disappeared, the two canoeists paddled with all their might toward a nearby village, Kabayamagi, for help. They quickly left their kayaks and ran through the village, shouting for assistance. At first, the villagers were frightened, but eventually, they stopped to listen. Ben and Chris managed to explain what had happened, securing some help. The locals also told them that in the river where Hendri had been taken, 7 other people had been lost in the past 5 years. Ben and Chris continued walking along the riverbanks near the village, hoping to find any sign of Hendri. Some villagers also helped with the search. It didn't take long before they spotted a black paddle and then a red kayak. Hendri's completely intact with no damage. The creature took the man, and no trace of him was ever found. Back home, sensing that something was wrong, Hendri's girlfriend turned to social media. She was soon startled by what she saw: condolence messages. Friends had been sending her these messages because of Hendri, and that's how she learned about what had happened. At first, she couldn't believe it. She even thought it might be some kind of mistake. She had already made plans with Hendri to meet at the end of the year, to start a new chapter together. He had told her this would be his last expedition, but she never imagined it would end like this.